everybody. Today I'm going to read through some of my Age of Sustainable Development book and listen to some LoFi beats. I'm also going to take some notes, so that will show up here as well. Maybe we'll do it like this. So, I'm going to start on page 4. I've already read a couple of pages, and then I figured this might be a good test for reading sounds and typing sounds. So, in our world today, good governance cannot refer only to governments. The world's multinational companies are often the most powerful actors. Our well-being depends on these powerful companies obeying the law, respecting the natural environment, and helping the communities in which they operate, especially to help eradicate extreme poverty. Yet, as with governments, reality is often the reverse. Multinational companies are often the agents of public corruption, bribing officials to bend regulations or tax policies in their favor, and engaging in tax evasion, money laundering, and reckless environmental damage. Thus, the normative side of sustainable development envisions 4 basic objectives of good society: economic prosperity, social inclusion and cohesion, environmental sustainability, and good governance by major social actors. Alright, I'm going to include that in my notes. The normative side. It's a lot to ask for, and there is no shortage of challenge. To achieving sustainable development in practice, yet the stakes are high. Achieving sustainable development on our crowded, unequal, and degraded planet is the most important challenge facing our generation. The SDGs must be the compass, the lodestar for the future development of the planet during the period 2015 to mid-century. Before proceeding further, let me give a very brief history of the concept of sustainable development. The term sustainable as applied to ecosystems goes back a long way. Fisheries managers, for example, have long used the concept of the maximum sustainable yield to denote the maximum fish catch per year consistent with a stable fish population. In 1972, at the UN Conference on the Human Environment in Stockholm, the challenge of maintaining sustainability in the context of economic growth and development was first brought to the global forefront. The same year, the blockbuster book Limits to Growth, published by the Club of Rome, argued forcefully that continued economic growth on the prevailing economic patterns would collide with the Earth's finite resources, leading to a future overshoot and collapse. While 1972 put the challenge of sustainable development in the global stage, the phrase itself was introduced 8 years later in an influential publication entitled World Conservation Strategy: Living Resource Conservation for Sustainable Development. The path-breaking publication noted in its foreword that human beings in their quest for economic development and enjoyment of the riches of nature must come to terms with the reality of resource limitations and carrying capacity of ecosystems, and must take account of the needs of future generations. The purpose of the document was to help advance the achievement of sustainable development through the conservation of living resources. The phrase was then adopted and popularized in the report of the United Nations Commission on Environment and Development, known widely by the name of its chairwoman, Gro Harlem Brundtland. The Brundtland Commission gave a definition of the concept of sustainable development, one that was used for 25 years. We'll put that down. Brundtland Commission. Sustainable development is development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Okay. This intergenerational concept of sustainable development was widely adopted, including at the Rio Earth Summit in 1992. One of the key principles of the Rio Declaration was that development today must not threaten the needs of present and future generations. Over time, however, the definition of sustainable development evolved into a more practical approach, focusing less on intergenerational needs and more on the holistic approach, linking economic development, social inclusion, and environmental sustainability. In 2002, at the UN World Summit on Sustainable Development in Johannesburg, the WSD Plan of Implementation spoke of the integration of the three components of sustainable development: economic development, social development, and environmental protection, as interdependent and mutually reinforcing pillars. Interesting. Put that in there. The integration of three components of sustainable development: economic development, concept of intergenerational justice remains, but is now secondary to the emphasis on holistic development that embraces economic, social, and environmental objectives. The three-part vision of sustainable development was again emphasized on the 20th anniversary of the Rio Summit. In the final outcome document for the Rio 20 Summit, the aim of sustainable development was put this way. We also reaffirm the need to achieve sustainable development by promoting sustained, inclusive, and equitable economic growth, creating greater opportunities for all, reducing inequalities, raising basic standards of living, fostering equitable social development and inclusion, and promoting integrated and sustainable management of natural resources and ecosystems that support inter alia economic, social, and human development while facilitating ecosystem conservation, regeneration, and restoration, and resilience in the face of new and emerging challenges. Wow, that's quite the definition. The SDGs called for in the same outcome document are to be based on the three-part framework. Call this the three-part framework, since that seems to be what they're calling it. SDGs should address and incorporate in a balanced way all three dimensions of sustainable development and their interlinkages. We also underscore that SDGs should be action-oriented, concise, and easy to communicate. Limited in number, aspirational, global in nature, and universally applicable to all countries, while taking into account different national realities, capacities, and level of development, and respecting national policies and priorities. Government should drive implementation of the SDGs with the active involvement of all relative stakeholders as appropriate. I will discuss SDGs in greater detail in the final chapter. Until then, I will use the concept of sustainable development in the current sense of a three-way normative framework, embracing economic development, social inclusion, and environmental stability. In addition, I will refer to sustainable development in an analytical field of study, one that aims to explain and predict the complex and nonlinear interactions of human and natural systems. I turn next to this analytical sense of the term. Embracing complexity. In addition to being a normative ethical concept, sustainable development is also a science of complex systems. A system is a group of interacting components that, together with the rules of their interaction, constitute an interconnected whole. The brain is a system of interacting neurons. The human body is a system of some 10 trillion individual cells, with those cells interacting in systematic ways in various organ systems, circulatory systems, nervous system, digestive system, etc. The cell itself is a system of interacting organelles, and the economy is a system of millions of individuals and businesses bound together in markets, contracts, laws, public services, and regulations. We talk about these systems as complex because their interactions give rise to behaviors and patterns that are not easily discernible from the underlying components themselves. Okay, I can't really put anything yet. The conscious brain cannot be reduced to a list of its neurons and neurotransmitters. Functions such as consciousness depend on highly complex interactions of the component neurons. A living cell is more than the sum of the nucleus, ribosomes, and other components. The systems of metabolism, gene expression, and the like depend on highly complex interactions of the components. A growing economy is more than the sum of its individual businesses and workers. Complexity scientists speak of the emergent properties of a complex system, meaning those characteristics that emerge from the interaction of the components to produce something that is more than the sum of its parts. Complex systems have many unexpected characteristics. Sip of water. They often respond in a nonlinear way to shocks or changes, meaning that even a modest change in the components of the systems can cause a large, perhaps catastrophic change in the performance of the system as a whole. A small change in the cell's chemistry can lead to its death. A small change in the physical environment may cause large and cascading changes to the relative abundance of the species in that environment. The failure of a single business can lead to a financial panic and a global downturn, such as occurred when the Lehman Brothers investment bank failed in September 2008. A single bank failure, or a single infection, or a slight change in Earth's temperature can lead to a chain reaction, positive feedback process, which has explosive consequences. Sustainable development involves not only just one, but four complex interacting systems. Okay. Sustainable development involves four complex interacting systems. Global economy, social interactions, changes to complex Earth systems climate problems, governance, in each of these complex systems, economic, social, environmental, and governance, the special properties of complex systems such as emergent behavior and strong nonlinear dynamics, including booms and busts, are all too apparent. Complex systems require a certain complexity of thinking as well. It is a mistake to believe that the world's sustainable development problems can be boiled down to one idea or one solution. A complex phenomenon such as poverty in the midst of plenty has many causes that defy a single diagnosis or prescription. Just as in the cases of environmental ills or communities torn asunder by mistrust and violence, medical doctors are trained to understand and respond to the complex systems known as the human body. Medical doctors know that a fever or a pain can have countless causes. Part of the job of a skilled medical doctor is to make a differential diagnosis of the specific causes of a fever in a particular patient. A skilled sustainable development practitioner needs to be a complex systems expert in the same way, acknowledging the complexity of the issue and looking to make a specific diagnosis for each specific case. The role of technological change. The maglev in Shanghai is a remarkable piece of technology that carries people at speeds of more than 200 miles per hour to and from Shanghai City and its international airport. It's a product of joint work between engineering companies from Europe and China and has been operating for the past decade. It is an example of how new technology can help to achieve sustainable development by improving transport services and energy efficiency, and eventually enabling a shift to clean, low-carbon energy systems. The maglev, unlike earlier generations of rail, is powered by electricity rather than by coal or petroleum. If and when the electricity that powers the maglev is eventually produced with a low-carbon primary energy source rather than the coal that today dominates electricity generation in China, the electric-powered intercity rail will also promote the shift from fossil fuels to safe low-carbon energy sources such as wind and solar, which are much less polluting and do not result in human-induced climate change, as discussed later. Throughout our study of sustainable development, we will note three aspects of technology. First, technological advances are the main driver of long-term global economic growth. The rapid growth of the world economy since 1750 is the result of 250 years of technological advances, starting with the steam engine and steam power transportation, the internal combustion engine, electrification, industrial chemistry, scientific agronomy. What does agronomy mean? I'd like to look that word up. Soil management and crop production. Agronomy. aviation, nuclear power, and today's ICTs. Without these advances, the world economy and world population would have stopped growing long ago. Second, technological advances often have negative side effects, even when their direct effects are enormously positive. The burning of coal is both the emblem of the Industrial Revolution and the root of our current environmental crisis. One can say that coal enabled modern civilization through the invention of the steam engine and the harnessing of fossil fuels for motive force. Yet coal is now used on such a scale and with such dire side effects that it endangers civilization itself. In 2010, humanity emitted about 14 billion tons of carbon dioxide through coal burning, close to half of the world's total emissions of CO2 due to fossil fuel. Unless coal is phased out rapidly or used with new technologies such as carbon capture and sequestration, discussed later, the damage to the planet and the global economy will be overwhelming. Third, technological advances, at least some extent under human guidance. What are these? Listing 1, 2, and 3. Throughout our study of sustainable development, we will note 3 aspects of technology. Okay, we're going to make a technology. What should I say about it? It can be used to promote can be used to help to achieve sustainable development. By shifting to cleaner, low carbon energy systems. Now let's get the 3 aspects here. Three elements, we're going to call it. 1, main driver of long-term global economic growth. 2, often have negative side effects, even when their direct effects are enormously positive. Under human guidance, So third, technological advance is, at least to some extent, under human guidance. Sometimes technological advance is portrayed as a great lottery, determined by the luck of the draw or the skill of individual inventors and scientists. Alternatively, technological advance is sometimes described as merely following the demands of the market. Companies invest in research and development in order to pursue profits. We end up with research on challenges sought by the marketplace, not necessarily those of vital importance for the poor or for the environment. Yet there is another side to technological change, the idea that it can be directed toward human goals through a deliberate and goal-based interaction of public and private R&D efforts. We are used to the idea that governments steer technology for reasons of state, that is, for military purposes. Governments have long hired engineers and inventors to design and build new weapons and defenses, many involving pioneering breakthroughs in technology. World War I heralded major advances in aviation, and World War II brought advances in computers, radar, semiconductors, rocketry, antibiotics, communications. Semiconductors twice, and countless other advances. Interesting. Am I reading that wrong? Semiconductors. And countless other advances led by state-supported research, including America's Manhattan Project, which brought together world-renowned physicists to design and construct the first atomic bombs. Of course, we should greatly prefer to achieve technological advances through peaceful means, and indeed there is a distinguished track record of government support for civilian technological advances, though often governments had military purposes also in mind, even in the civilian breakthroughs. In recent decades, the internet, information technology, aviation, space technology such as global positioning systems, genomics, nanotechnology, and countless other areas of technological advance owe their development in significant measure to government support. In the age of sustainable development, we will need such directed technological change in order to develop new technologies for sustainable energy transport, construction, food production, health, delivery, education, and more. Governments will rely on many policy tools to drive innovations in a targeted direction, including the public financing of R&D, direct research in public laboratories, regulations, prizes for new inventions, and modifications of patent laws to encourage R&D on specific diseases. Sustainable development as a normative approach. Sustainable development is a way to understand the world as a complex interaction of economic, social, environmental, and political systems. Okay. Let's put normative approach here. Don't want it underlined. Yet it is also a normative or ethical view of the world, a way to define the objectives of a well-functioning society, one that delivers well-being for its citizens today and for future generations. The basic point of sustainable development in the normative sense is that it urges us to have a holistic vision of what a good society should be. The easy answer for many people is that a good society is a rich society, one in which higher incomes are the ultimate purpose of economic and political life. Yet something is clearly too limited in such a view. Suppose a society was rich on average because one person was super rich while the rest were in fact very poor. Most people would not regard this as a very attractive society, one that brings well-being to the citizenry people care not only about the average income, but about the income distribution as well. There are at least 5 kinds of concerns about the distribution of well-being. The first is extreme poverty. Are some people still exceedingly poor in the midst of plenty? The second is inequality. Are there gaps between the rich and poor very wide? Are the gaps between the rich and poor very wide? The third is social mobility. Can a poor person today hope to achieve economic success in the future, or are practical barriers to advancement too high? The fourth is discrimination. Are some people, such as women, racial minorities, religious minorities, or indigenous populations, disadvantaged by their identity within a group? The fifth is social cohesion. Is the society riven by distrust, animosity, cynicism, and the absence of shared moral code? Sustainable development takes a view on these issues, calling on society to aim for the end of extreme poverty, the reduction of glaring gaps of wealth and poverty, a high degree of social mobility, including good life chances for children born into poverty, the absence of discrimination, including by gender, race, religion, or ethnicity, and the fostering of social trust, mutual support, moral values, and cohesion. We can summarize these objectives with the term social inclusion. Another aspect of a good society is being a good steward of the national environment, or natural environment. If we break the physical systems of water and biodiversity, if we destroy the oceans and the great rainforests, we will lose immeasurably. If we continue on a path that fundamentally changes the Earth's climate, we are going to face grave dangers. Therefore, from a normative perspective, environmental sustainability certainly seems right and compelling if we care, as we should, about the well-being of our children and our children's children and future generations. We also care about how our government functions. Good governance and the rule of law create a sense of security and well-being. On the other hand, corruption, lawlessness, untrustworthy politicians, unfair government services, significant discrimination, insider dealing, and so forth create a lot of unhappiness. Careful studies have confirmed that across the world people feel happier and more satisfied with life when they trust their government. Unfortunately, in many places in the world, people do not trust their government to be honest and fair and to keep them basically secure, and they have all too many valid reasons for the distrust. From a normative perspective, then, we could say that a good society is not only an economically prosperous society with high per capita income, but also one that is also socially inclusive. I don't know if you need both alsos there. Environmentally sustainable and well-governed. That is my working definition of the normative objectives of sustainable development. It is the point of view endorsed by the SDGs adopted by the UN member states. The fundamental question is how to take our knowledge of the interconnections of the economy, society, the environment, and governance and apply it to determine how to produce prosperous, inclusive, sustainable, and well-governed societies. That is, how do we achieve the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals? We shall see that there are indeed some powerful ways to achieve sustainable development as a shared set of goals for the planet. All right. I'm going to stop reading there. My voice is getting a little raspy, so But if you guys like this type of video, I can certainly do more. Let me know in the comment section. Like and subscribe. Have a good evening.